Thank you for joining us. What feels like a very timely conversation. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves in a second. For those I've not met, I know some of you in the room, my name's Chelsie. I am a Senior Social Impact Advisor at Business in the Community, or BITC. BITC is a responsible business charity that essentially helps businesses on their responsible business journey. So my role at BITC is to work with our businesses to support them within social impact, to be more strategic, to embed it at their core purpose, the strategy, etc. But today's not really about me. So we have a wonderful panel that are going to introduce themselves in a second. We've already gone totally rogue. We removed the table on walking in. I am the chair. Whether I can actually chair this group of people is anybody's guess. They've all got some really great things to say, and we're going to try and keep it quite fluid as we can, and still finish on time. But today we're here to talk about rebuilding trust. So there's a lot of data out there. The trust barometer is showing that trust is dropping. It's not a surprise to any of us. I think we all know that and recognise it, see it, potentially feel it. And trust with public sector is dropping. And what we really want to talk about today is how we can rebuild that trust, how we can work with local authorities, how we can work with business to deliver social value, but also make sure that we are empowering our communities, all the great things we've heard this morning, building relationships that are transformational, not transactional, and how we can really support to do that. So we know we need to do something different. What is it that we actually need to do? So we're going to start to talk a little bit about some of the data. And Fiona, I'm going to ask you to start, if that's all right. So I know Social Value Portal replicated a survey recently that showed that only 16%, which is actually an increase. So we're saying 16% of people, 2% increase, I believe, of citizens trust that local authorities in the development process. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about the data?
Yeah, would it be helpful for me to introduce myself first?
Yeah. Don't swear. I'm live on Channel 4. Yeah, that would be really good. Okay. I actually printed these notes at my local library because I am at the heart of my community. And I joined yesterday, and it is the tiniest writing I've ever seen in my life, and I cannot see a bloody thing on my notes. So yes, that would be really helpful. I could see your face doing something, and I was like, what is a face doing? Yes,
we could
delightful.
Also just speak, then introduce ourselves at the end. Yeah, leave it a mystery.
We are rogue, but that might be too rogue.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Well,
my name is Fiona McCully, and I'm a bit of a rookie on this panel. I was just saying it's actually my first panel ever, so please go easy on me. However, I'm very excited to be here, and I hope that I can offer at least a somewhat interesting perspective. I am on the real estate advisory team at Social Value Portal. My title is planning consultant, meaning that my core role is to help developers get across the planning approval line through demonstrating a credible strategy to deliver social value throughout the entire life cycle of their development. Keyword there is credible, and we use the TOM system as a system of accountability, a shared sort of language and methodology for explaining this new type of value that's been historically left off the table. However, it's a bit of an experiment. There's a lot to it, and trust is a core part of our job, getting the trust of communities that we're ultimately trying to serve. So I think that learning from each other is incredibly important to do that, learning from each other's trialing and erroring. And I'm happy to jump in to talk about the data, but would it be helpful to go around the room first? Okay, cool.
Hi everyone, my name's Marnie, and I am a founder and director of an organisation called Neighbourly Lab. So Neighbourly Lab is a non-profit research and innovation organisation, and we spend a lot of time in communities trying to understand what is going on for them, to build social connection, to also then inform local services, local authorities to work more effectively with residents. So we spend a lot of time in communities understanding, listening, and then feeding back what that means for local authorities to do their work. And we also work across the community and faith and sometimes business sectors too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marnie. So my name's Steve Butterworth. I'm CEO at Neighbourly. I'm confusingly sat next to Marnie, but no connection between Neighbourly Lab and Neighbourly. Yet. Yes, there you go. Yeah, M&A in action. Neighbourly, in its simplest form, Neighbourly is a corporate giving platform. So we help businesses donate time, money, and surplus product to a network of nearly 50,000 vetted local charities and good causes across the UK and Ireland. The key word there is local. So it's very much about playing making those local connections. So to bring that to life, whether that's running a sort of volunteering campaign for the likes of Karen at Hayes there, who is across the entire employee base across every location in the UK. You can imagine sort of coordinating that, is full of friction, but it's not just about making the connection, it's about making sure you're connecting those organisations with the right type of causes, the right type of impact theme, and then be able to measure that as well. We also do it for the likes of Sainsbury's and Lidl and Aldi. We do their local food surplus redistribution on a local level, so connecting local stores with local charities. And then also we run the likes of the B&Q Foundation, Pret Foundation, JD Foundation, helping them to donate money, but smaller grants to local charities and good causes. So we're basically the matchmaker, the communicator, and the data aggregator.
Liz Byrne. So I have Believe Solutions, which I co-founded last year. And essentially what we do is look at the system that's all associated with social value and CSR. So my background is 20 years in policing, very large transformational change, lots of opportunities to work, not just with public sector, but private sector and community sector organisations. And what I saw with multi-million-pound budgets was what we were getting wasn't good enough. And it wasn't because the intention wasn't there. And it wasn't because I couldn't say I had all these amazing organisations, whether they be private sector companies or communities. What I found is that the system that was creating, in the same way we heard this morning around the competitiveness, the system wasn't creating the ability for people to work together and develop really trusting relationships. So as a result of that, myself and my co-founder set up the business last year, and we've been working now with public and private sector companies to be able to change the system, to allow those relationships to be a lot more fruitful, a lot more trust-based, and actually get into some of the longer-term stuff, which is all what we're trying to do anyway, aren't we?
Fiona. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Armstrong. I'm the Head of Procurement, Sales and Business Services at Durham County Council. Durham County Council is a large unitary authority. Our spend profile was 950 million last year. So we've got, pretty good reputation in Durham. We've also got quite a bit of influence across our suppliers and our external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. And social value is really at the heart of what we do, not just from a procurement perspective, but across the wider organisation. I've got 30 years experience in local government, and hopefully I'll be able to bring a little bit of that insight and experience into the panel discussion today.
Amazing. Thank you all. Should we try again? Fiona.
Yeah.
Now everybody knows who you are. Can you tell us a little bit about what the data's saying?
Yes. Although I think it would be helpful if I started with a definition of trust, just so we can understand what the data is talking about when we're talking about trust. Because I do happen to have a degree in economic psychology, so I love this sort of discussion of social constructs and stuff. But stop that rambling. Trust really is a heuristic. It is a belief that another will do as expected, and this heuristic, this gut feeling, is something that we develop around the age of 2. It's something that is a key developmental stage. Everyone in this room experiences trust, and we're taught it. We're taught how to experience it and feel it. There's 2 kind of key types of trust. There's particularized trust. That's in the type of trust between you and a specific person or circumstance. So that's the type of trust that is like me trusting that my partner will cook a nice dinner tonight or something along those lines. That's something that's built up through this interpersonal relationship. But what I think that we are largely talking about is generalized trust. So that is trust in systems, in organizations. That is trust in strangers. And this is the social fabric of our economic system. This is the reason why you're able to book an appointment to get a haircut or something, and you don't have to pay up front because it's trusted that you will pay after you receive that service. It's why you don't pay while the service is being received. It is this trust that you will do as expected, that you'll receive the service as expected. So that really is what trust is about. Trustworthiness specifically is driven by 4 key variables. So it's the positive influence of credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And I think we'll keep coming back to this formula because underneath that, what it's detracted by is self-interest, self-orientation. And I think that will come up quite a bit when we're talking about the self-orientation of businesses and industries, and potentially the level of distrust that we're seeing in developers, which is what our study was about. So earlier this year, we at Social Value Portal decided to replicate a 2019 study that Grosvenor did, where they asked the general public to what extent they trust local authorities and to what extent they trust private developers to act in the best interest of the public when it comes to large-scale developments. At the time, they found, so this was 5-6 years ago, only 2% of the public trusted private developers to act in the best interest of the public. That is horrific. That is shockingly low. That just is showing this level of rigidity in this system, that something has gone wrong. There needs to be a ton of bureaucracy to make up for that lack of trust. So when we replicated this study, we surveyed about 8,000 people across the UK. We did see a slight rise. So it did go up to 16% of respondents saying that they trust the general public. And that, I mean, that's massive that there's this rise, but 16% is also abysmally low. It shows that there's some progress, though, in the industry. And I think that that is in large part attributable to, I mean, we saw the state of the industry report earlier today. There's been a ton of work in the real estate world to improve relationships with communities and build that trust. But what we're seeing is that it is not enough yet. So that is why we're here discussing this today. Yeah, does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Keep rambling.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, that's really useful. And I guess thinking about trust, I'm already going rogue. When we all met to kind of talk about what we were going to discuss today, we did spend a lot of time actually, what even is trust? It was like we were all just sat in this like philosophical discussion. But I guess reflecting on what Fiona's just said, I think she has articulated it so well based on the discussion. Does anybody have anything to add about the definition and like what do we mean by trust?
So for me, trust is how somebody feels, as opposed to. I was thinking this morning because there was lots of words about the use, using the word collaboration, and collaboration is something that you do, whereas trust is the way that you should be feeling as a result of that particular action. So, when I look at programs in communities and where it is that we have people that are thriving, it is because those are based on a position of trust. And I think that the self-interest is a really interesting perspective, because sometimes the word profit or not-for-profit can become dirty words when you're looking across the system. But if we are to build a system that's going to work, then actually we have to understand the self-interest. We have to understand that private sector are going to need to make profit to allow them to do more. We have to understand that communities need to be able to have opportunities presented to them and environments presented to them that at the moment are not accessible to them. And the big thing is that we have to focus on the things that are strong as opposed to the things that are wrong. And when I look at all the things that kind of I see, is that we could work, we might work with a private sector organisation and they're talking about making profit. And what we're trying to get the system to do is to say, well, rather than getting into social value, which is a transactional requirement through procurement, how do we create systems that look at shared value, which say, well, actually, rather than what are we going to do together, how can we create something that allows us to achieve the things that we all need to achieve? What's the sweet spot? And let's invest in that, because that will give you the longevity.
From a framing perspective, I think in terms of our conversation, given the title of this session is just rebuilding trust, doesn't say between whom. And I think we've got brilliant panelists here representing across the spectrum. But is it between local authority and the public? Is it between private sector and public sector? It's probably quite useful to look at it through that lens when we're sort of asking questions, because we've got complementary skill sets here, but I think the degrees of trust, or rather lack of, does vary, and you've just provided some stats there in terms of developers and how they're perceived, but then equally what the challenges that come within local authorities and how much the public trusts them. So that's I think an important framing for this conversation is who are we talking about rebuilding trust between?
Well, I actually think the brief was public sector and communities. Wasn't it? Was it? That was our brief. But I think we went a bit rogue. But I think, and I guess, and actually that brings us let's ask a question of the audience, which we were kind of talking about before you all got here, is to understand like where you're all from so that we know who we are speaking to. Obviously, there are people online, sorry that we can't pull you. But actually, it'd be interesting to know who in the room is from a private sector organisation, who is from a public sector organisation, and who is from a third sector organisation. And then I guess a follow-up question is that, like, who is based in procurement? Interesting, very interesting. So, I think our brief, which we're no surprise are going a little bit rogue from, is around building, I think it's around building trust between public sector and communities. But I think because of the audience and based on our discussion we had and probably because of what we all do for a living, most of us, we ended up talking a little bit around how business can also build, which I think kind of needs to feed into that as well. But we can start, I guess, thinking about public sector. So, Sarah, question for you. So we've talked a lot about what trust is, and I don't want to focus the whole of the session on all the negatives, as we said, but I'd like to just briefly talk about how we see mistrust representing itself. So I guess through the work that you do, through the work the council does, can you talk us through some of those challenges that you face in terms of that trust or the breakdown of trust?
Yeah, sure. So I think from a council perspective, mistrust can show itself in different ways. And I think from a council perspective, we are talking about members of the public, our residents and communities. And particularly from a procurement point of view, you know, often our residents think that things are done deals before we've even consulted with them, or even, you know, when we do consult with them, they really doubt whether they can make an impact on those outcomes. Often when we talk about social value, they wonder if those impacts will reach them as well. So I think it's really important that councils have clear and accessible kind of communications around all of that. And I think, you know, trust starts with being honest as well about some of the challenges. And, you know, councils really do have significant challenges, particularly from a financial perspective at the moment. You know, we've got significant financial pressures, but then we also have growing demand in complex areas such as children's social care. So it's not that we don't want to do more, it's just we're really stretched. We're dealing with some really complex priorities, and we've got to make sure that we make our money go further to deliver kind of on those outcomes. And we've got to work harder to do that as well. And I think just to give some example, within Durham, you know, 600 16 to 17-year-olds are not in education, employment or training. You know, that's a significant number. And we need to align our priorities to kind of those communities and how we reach out to them and how we engage. And that can be really difficult. We've got 25% of 16 to 64-year-olds who are economically inactive. So again, how do we reach out to those? How do we help those communities? And what kind of social value do we need to deliver to those people? So there are lots of challenges for councils, but actually there's a lot of opportunity within there as well to make an impact and to have some clear benefits as well.
Thank you. And I guess on the flip side then, how does this present itself within communities? Steve, I guess obviously Neighbourly works with a lot of like grassroots organisations that kind of are representative, say, of the communities that we want to work with. And originally my question was, where are we going wrong? But I think maybe my question should be, where can we be doing better? Like, what can we do to do better?
So I guess I think I look at it in the sort of three legs to the stool here. So if we've got the local authorities, you've got the corporate partners, and then you've got the community. But let's call that the local charities, and then the public sits there in the middle. And back to sort of the point about, you know, who are we talking about trusting who here? I think in a lot of instances, it comes down to what level of understanding is there of what a community needs. Because I think, and I'm probably going to look at it more through the lens of the private sector, it's very easy to make assumptions. And I think partly where trust has broken down is not actually asking those grassroots causes that are on the ground that are the most trusted in their communities. And we run an annual trust survey looking at trust in charities of all sizes. And it all exists on a continuum. And it's not to say that international charities aren't trusted, and all charities of all sizes have had challenges over the years. But I'd say it's consistently it is local grassroots causes that are viewed as being the most trusted in their community, and that's a phenomenal resource to be able to tap into. Whether that's looking at it through the eyes of the council, whether it's looking through the eyes of the corporates, and it's I think having confidence and faith in that information. Because again, looking at it through the eyes of the private sector, what happens arguably all too often is it's what the corporate needs rather than what the charities want. And how do you make sure it's very much a needs-led approach to be able to make sure that you're actually addressing something in real time? Because, and Sarah will attest to this, what's needed today is going to be different tomorrow, and you can't. One size doesn't fit all. So it's that, and it's. That then also means you have to build relationships, and where you've got that relationship piece, that obviously will build trust over time. So I think it's how do you make sure that organisations tap into those most trusted, most connected organisations that already exist, and let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's tap into the existing infrastructure that is already there.
Amazing, and could not agree more. And I guess to you then, Marnie, thinking about kind of the research that you do, and how that kind of links through to, I guess, the conversation so far, but some of what we've talked about. And when we think about communities and the research that you do, what does your experience tell us is critical to create that trust within communities? And also, I know you've done some interesting work on social capital. So I wondered if you could just touch on that as well.
Sure, thank you. So we do a lot of research in communities, doing some deep listening with residents to understand what their needs are. For example, we've just done a really, really hard, sticky, challenging piece of research with residents around homeless prevention and housing. So if any of you work in housing here, it's a very, and Sarah will attest to this, it's a very challenging situation, and it cuts across all of the council priorities, so adult social care, children's, all of the issues. And our kind of question was, well, how can we make homeless prevention better? Like make it more better, less worse, right? And so we went out and spent time listening to residents and spending time with the community sector. And the majority of these people that we spoke to just basically wanted to, can I swear? Wanted to tell the council to bugger off. And I said, we're doing all right. You've mucked this all up. We're doing all right. But the council really wants to prioritise doing it better and working more together. But the trust is so deeply broken that actually there's a lot of work that needs to be done, building relationships. So in terms of your question, what can they do? They need to just show up and stay. It's not one and done. I have one chat and go. It's how can we work with you? What do you need? What are your strengths? What are you contributing? And how can we build on what you're contributing? And I guarantee once they figure that out, they'll actually probably save quite a lot of money because there will be less duplication, one person that they can focus on giving support rather than ping-ponging people around a system, and the trust will start to build up. But it's going to take time and it needs repeated engagement. That's the first point. The next bit is about social capital. Shall I wait and come back? Or?
No.
All right. Oh. So we...
Need a break?
No, a little bit more.
We tried to turn the aircon on. Yeah, sorry.
So we're really lucky. We did a Nuffield funded study looking at building social capital in communities. And it was really innovative because we looked at different postcodes where adjacent places, one had really good social capital and one had really rubbish social capital, but everything else was the same. Income, jobs, green spaces, schools, all the same apart from their social capital. And this is a really good clue for how can we build trust in communities, because we looked at all the people that had good, strong social capital and said, well, what's working here and what's happening? And all the people that didn't have it and thought, well, we can't leave it to chance. You can't just go and make friends with people with good social capital. What do we need to put in place? And we found 5 key settings that can help build stronger social connections that you can all get involved in and change quite quickly. And these settings are already there. They're at your fingertips. They just need a bit of sort of relationship building, education, So how many of you here are parents with young kids how many of you stand at the playground and talk to other people in the playground? No? At the school gates? Anyone at the school gates? Okay, great. Really strong ways of building social connection across communities, using the school venues as places to do things for the wider community. Education, universities, great place for mixing and meeting, extending again beyond your social network. How many of you have got still friends from university? Right, see, there you go. Then there's the workplace. So there were places where the workplace was a really strong way of building social connections in communities. So not just by being there, that doesn't work. You have to be targeted, invest in your communities, invest in your staff, mixing across lines of difference, invest in extracurricular sport, and mixing are really good ways of doing that. How many of you have got friends from work? Right. So think about what gets done in the workplace to sustain that. Then other things that are really important, sports and leisure. So how many of you go to a gym? And apart from when you're looking at yourself building your muscle, how many of you have spoken to people at the gym? Right. It's a great place of mixing with people across lines of difference. What about sports? How many of you do grassroots sports or have watched your kids standing on the sidelines playing football, rugby? Right. Have you spoken to any parents when you've been there that you didn't know before? All the time. So all of these things are there, but we need to look at what we need to do to build stronger social capital so that the people that don't have social capital can benefit from getting more social capital, because that will benefit them in the longer term, increasing their social and economic connections. And then there are also music and the arts, faith and interfaith spaces. I'm not going to ask you any more questions, less audience participation. But there's lots of things that we can do, lots of settings that we can leverage that are already there to help build our trust within our communities.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I hope if nothing else, everyone goes away from this session and be better, less worser. And maybe take the headphones off at the school gates. I certainly will try and talk to more people. But no, that's really insightful. Thank you. And I'm actually going to jump to you, Sarah, and actually just ask, in terms of then like rebuild, we're now talking about, I guess, how institutions, how organisations, how businesses can build that trust back. What is the council doing? What are you up to?
Not a lot, yeah. So we've been really intentional around embedding social value into the heart of what we do. It's not an add-on. It's not just part of procurement. It's a significant part of what the council does and what our ethos is. We've actually, and we're really proud that we've just developed our first social value strategy for the council. We had a policy, years ago, but we've actually developed a strategy, and we're hoping to take that through our cabinet process. And, within that, we've aligned it to the council plan, our wider priorities, and that's a real step forward for us. And we're working with our suppliers to ask them to make commitments to how they can meet the priorities of the council and where we need those commitments to be as well. Back in 2021, we also launched something called the County Durham Pound Project, or the award-winning County Durham Pound Project. And that is an initiative that was designed to retain economic value in our county and helping to strengthen community resilience. Now, it started like that. It's actually evolved, since 2021. And we are moving from transactional social value, as you alluded to, into transformational social value. So moving from just counting, what we spend to actually how does that really make a difference in our communities. And that's, a fantastic initiative. And we've built trust through that initiative as well by developing a consistent and transparent model. And last month, we actually announced that with our collaborative partners, we've delivered over £1 billion worth of social value benefits in County Durham. Now, those numbers are impressive, but actually the case studies that sit behind those numbers are even more impressive. So the sports clubs we've developed, the community gardens that people can enjoy, the apprenticeships, the job opportunities, that's the stuff that really matters. And to rebuild trust, we shout about that, we tell people about that to make sure that they understand what those real impacts are. And yeah, we've had several high-profile events to showcase our achievements, and we're building that capacity internally as well, you know, with our limited resources, but we're looking at where our public, private and VCSE communities can come together to deliver those real outcomes. Now, it's not perfect, and trust is an ongoing process, but, you know, we've really made some impacts on our communities, and we continue to make that really good progress.
Amazing. Thank you. And thanks for sharing that. And I guess then coming to you, Liz, I think your background is very interesting. So obviously you now work on that local level with business, with organisations, with the public sector, but obviously you've got a background in policing, which is very interesting. And I think what's really interesting, I guess, about your experience is like where those two worlds collide and where they came together. And if you've got any reflections or like what your biggest takeaways are from where your worlds have collided.
So I think it all came from projects. So I wasn't a police officer, but I did 10 years in North Yorkshire, which was like heartbeat. Sorry, North Yorkshire, but it is. And then I worked 2 years inspecting police forces for efficiency and effectiveness and legitimacy. And then went to work at Teesside, where it was the #1 crime rate in the country. The demographic there is incredibly difficult. There just hasn't been employment there. There hasn't been opportunities. So, you know, you're working with the wards that are in those top 10%. You know, we used to have a joke, like we were #1 at everything that you never wanted to be #1 on. So murder, yeah, that's us, you know, whatever it was. And kind of all of the mechanisms that I would have had within my role to create efficiency for policing post-COVID were just absolutely obliterated. And, you know, one of the things that I did was I did a £20 million programme to create a force HQ. And within that had a wellbeing room right at the very top. And before COVID, it was everybody's lunch break because it had all the really lovely things in it. You know, had a radio in there, and then they nicked the radio and all this kind of stuff. But it was a nice place to be. Post-COVID, with the mental health crisis that came with that, and is still with our communities today, which a lot of people sometimes don't talk about in the private sector because it's not part of your world, is the room was full every day. And it had people that were really, really distressed. I've had, you know, friends that have had their careers cut short because of stress and burnout, because they cannot keep up with the demand. So the bit for me was, you know, when I'm looking at policing, I was saying, well, where is it that I can create change and efficiency and effectiveness that's going to deal with that scale of demand? And the only place where I could see that it was really inefficient, not, just like I said, this isn't a criticism on intention, the inefficiency was in social value. Because it never made sense to me as to why I couldn't just tell the private sector, be great if you could do this. And the last job that I had for policing is I was responsible for everything that wasn't a cop. So I had the cars and the digital and, you know, the guns and all of these kinds of things. And from what I could see from that perspective was legislation was changing, and I could see through the whole ESG agenda that appetite was becoming a lot more prevalent. And certainly then when the legislation changed, I would have just have had them all in. And I would have said, I have no idea where this is going to go. But I know these are our crime hotspot areas. This is where we need to make a difference in these particular communities. And all of the conversations at that point was, let's do it. There was no barrier there anymore. Whereas previously, before the legislation, I couldn't do it. I couldn't prescribe anything. I couldn't say to them in procurement, well, rather than going to 20 schools, I want you to go to that school where the building was, where I was putting up the building. It was in one of the crime hotspot areas in Teesside. And I couldn't get, and even the private sector company wanted to do it. But when we looked at the system by which we were procuring, when we looked at things like contract management, we looked at the legislation, it was really hard to hold to account. So on that regard, that's where then that was the mandate for me to say, well, I can't achieve the efficiency and the effectiveness in policing using traditional methods. It can't happen because the scale of the demand, and you'll see it as well in the council, people going into accident and emergency, the level of violence and the mental health crisis, not that I want to get really negative, but we can't fix that with the way that public sector, private sector and community sectors have worked historically. Something transformational needs to happen. And when we started in the social value space, that's fine, but actually we need to get to this shared value. we need to get to this shared purpose. So when we go in and talk to private sector, we always start off on the social value thing, and then we always end up with, then actually, no, we need to be pushing this all the way through the business. We need to look at how we're making decisions, how we're holding ourselves accountable, as opposed to having to do that for the purposes of contract. So that's kind of the mandate that said, right, I need to go and do that now.
I love it. I love it. She gets it done. I nearly swore again. She gets it done. So I am going to come to the audience online and in the room for questions in a minute. And I've got a million questions, but we can't ask them all. So I'm going to ask a question of the whole panel, and whoever wants to answer, you can all answer. If you can do it in the next few minutes. But I'm going to ask, what mechanisms can we put in place to ensure that we're understanding communities and ensure that we're meeting promises around social value that are actually delivered? And or, two questions, so take your pick. If you could implement one change tomorrow that could and would change, close that trust gap, what would it be?
So I think to answer your first question about what's needed, I think comes back to my earlier point around listening to the community in the first place. I think, and it'd be an interesting one for both Sarah and Liz to pick up, but I think in terms of the change, I think a lot of it comes down to how do you bring to life the human story of all of these things. So Sarah was just talking about case studies. It's one thing saying X amount's gone into this project. It's like, well, kind of so what? And actually having the beneficiaries, talk about that makes it real. So I think for me, it's a comms piece as much as anything. So I mean, super simple answer would be better communication, but it's the storytelling bit, and it's not binary. It's not either you measure it or you tell the story. It's both. But I think there's a need to balance it a bit. I think we've sort of swung over the years, especially in the social value world, between the two. But I think we should never lose sight of that human story bit, because one story can actually tell the story of thousands. I think that's the bit I'd change.
Also, you need places and spaces for people to mix and meet. There's nowhere to build trust. And in a lot of the places, there are no youth centres, there are no community centres, there are no hubs. There are bits of things along the way, but we need many, many more places for people to mix and meet and bump into each other. So the ways our spaces are configured need to feel safer and need to be places that people can bump into each other and have that small contact, so they're building familiarity and making connections across lines of difference, whatever the difference is, whether it's cultural, whether it's organisational, whether it's, whatever the difference it is, we need to start building that trust at a human level.
Completely agree. But yeah, there's that need for third spaces, which I was going to bring up from looking at our data when we ran this study, surveying 8,000 people across the UK about their levels of trust. We found that actually trust levels were relatively high in London and Manchester, around big cities, but where they dropped off dramatically was in rural settings. And I mean, you can begin to guess that might be a lack of third spaces. That might be a lack of that social capital element that you're talking about. So I'm not going to steal your idea. I'm actually going to say another one, but I do completely agree that that's a good idea. I think looking at that trustworthiness equation that I was talking about earlier, where it's the positive influences of credibility, reliability, and intimacy detracted by self-orientation, I don't think it's realistic right now to argue over trying to convince businesses to be less self-interested, just if we're talking about immediate, quick changes. So I think focusing on that numerator is really helpful. Focusing on specifically credibility and reliability, super important. So having structured ways of interacting with communities, super important. And then intimacy, that bit I think is essential. There's so much polarization and separation between these larger institutions and the people that they're actually impacting. And so bridging that gap, actually having a human face that is interacting with communities is absolutely essential so that you have these better communication channels. So yeah, that's my answer.
Just in case you steal my just in case. Yeah, so and I think Steve's right that the communication is really key, but also kind of the co-creation. So whilst the comms are really important and we want to speak to our residents and, you know, understand what their needs are, it's taken it that step further forward, because whilst I might think I'm hip and young still, how do I really know what, you know, looked after children might need in County Durham? You know, who am I to kind of guess and kind of identify things? We need to listen to those young people. What is it that they're struggling with? What do they need to then kind of develop as a young adult? So it is really listening, taking that on board, and then co-creating those services with those people. Is that what you were going to say?
So this is where I kind of come back to the shared value thing. And, you know, I wonder how many, when I think about how can the community actually benefit your business and benefit what you do. So there's value that doesn't just go down, it goes up as well. So, you know, the community organisations that I would have worked with previously are the very best people to understand wellbeing, mental health, and also EDI, because they are trying to overcome those barriers with communities every day, yet companies spend lots and lots of money with consultants to do those kinds of things. And there's a way where we can look at things like supply chain diversification and actually create difference into communities through alternative routes. The other things listening to everybody else is I sometimes come back to this word of dignity, because there's no dignity in poverty, and especially sometimes in the way that services are designed. They're designed to kind of go in at where there's a need or where there's something that's wrong. And I really, really passionately believe, and certainly after working in Teesside for 10 years, that we have to be optimistic and focus on strength and go from a strength basis. And the locations that you're talking about, Marnie, are really important, because where the public sector or where the private sector might think of the places where communities go the way they feel safe and secure are not necessarily where people feel safe and secure. And that might be the working man's club. It might be the rugby club. It might be those places where those social connections are made because people feel that they are on the same level. And I think that's the difference that we can start making. Traditionally, social value would have looked at schools and education system, and that's brilliant. There's no problem with that at all. But how can we diversify that so we work with communities and build from a position of strength?
That's too much power for one person. That's too much. I mean, we did all agree that none of us actually needed a mic, but we do actually need a mic for people online. So we've probably got time for a few questions. I don't know, and I've got my iPad here. If anybody online would like to submit a question that I can ask, but whilst we wait to see if anyone submits a question, does anybody in the room have a question of our panel? Oh, we've got quite a few hands up. Do you want one of these?
Hi, Anna Fallon. I'm from McBain's. We're a small multidisciplinary construction consultancy. We work nationally, but predominantly in the southeast. And in our company, we have a very well-intentioned group of architects who really want to design for communities. And as part of that, they do a lot of community consultation, which is great. And being able to implement social value in that has been a really fulfilling exercise. The main challenge that we see, though, is because a lot of the developing areas that we're working in have very concentrated kind of bouts of development. Those grassroots kind of organizations that you were talking about, Steve, they tend to experience kind of consultation fatigue, and they're doing a lot of talking about problems and talking about the issues of communities, but not necessarily seeing a huge amount of change instantly or necessarily feeling that they're being listened to. So yeah, I was wondering if you have any kind of thoughts on consultation fatigue as a challenge, but also how that interacts with trust and really breaks down trust with communities, the grassroots organizations in them, and the public and private sector.
Yeah, I've got a quick answer. I guess when you're doing any sort of consultation, it is absolutely essential that what is being discussed is material considerations. So you're only discussing what actually can be changed. Otherwise, you're just going to fatigue people, and you're going to get them to invest so much energy into telling their story for it to go nowhere. So building that trust is actually having a quick response to what is being asked. So yeah, material considerations, that's my quick answer. But
Cool. Do you reimburse them? You don't need to answer that, but reimbursement and compensation either directly to the organisations that you're working with or to the residents that you're talking to every single time, as well as a feedback loop. Even if you've got no updates, let them know that there's no updates, because otherwise there's just this void of information.
I'll just echo that. I mean,
There is so much point in you, Steve. Don't ever feel like that. Don't ever feel like that. I've never seen two people's hands go up so fast. You didn't have a chance, did you? These passionate. That's what we like to see. Any more questions? Yeah. Maybe that question wasn't for you. You got name dropped, but.
Hi, I'm Rosie Blackett and I deliver the Care Leaver Covenant on behalf of the DFE. In a similar kind of thread to what the ladies just kind of spoke about, sometimes I think this is a little bit about language. So we talk about kind of consultation and lived experience, Steve, you kind of talked about. But actually this is seeing that lived experience as a real expertise and actually the value in lived experience as an expertise. And as a commodity that should be actually seen as expertise, just like the expertise within businesses. And I think part of that is around getting the language right, around how we're consulting with lived experience experts to help us guide. Just wondered what your thoughts were around kind of language and maybe what kind of language you use within your organisations and things.
I mean, I think you make the right point. It is a question of language, and I think if you look at the motivations across different stakeholders, they just do speak a different language. I think coming back to the sort of the consultation bit, it is a two-way street, and it is how do you consistently ensure that there is a value exchange, and it is actually what I was going to say is it's hard when potentially programs run for a very long time and there's no sort of immediate quick fix. So then it becomes more about how you can complement how they are being supported in a multidisciplinary way. So yes, I can give you some insight as to what's going on in our local area, and that's going to help you form your program. But actually, in the meantime, are there other? Can you signpost as an organisation to other, whether it's private sector or public sector, ways of getting benefits into those organisations too? Which I guess comes back to what you're saying, Marnie, about there being something in it for them. I think the language piece then, it's establishing that communication piece we were saying earlier about knowing that at that sort of local level, we're talking about even if it's a big business, it's still the local people within that local community and being able to sort of speak that language to each other. I think the familiarity piece becomes a key thing because it's relatability then as well. But again, it's not a perfect science, and I think what we've found, do we get it right? When we're the broker between the two, not always. And I think we try desperately sort of to remove that friction. It's just an ongoing sort of coaching part to it. And again, be interesting to get Sarah's view on the council side, because again, people's agendas are very different. Whether it's from the DFE, the cause, or the corporate saying, well, this is what I need and this is what I want, and where's the middle ground? And I think that's where coming back to what was being discussed in this morning's panel around the sort of the collaboration piece. It was interesting to hear about the kind of the competition bit. Can you collaborate but still be competitive? I think for me, it's actually you can still get on and trust people and agree on things, even if you don't agree on everything. And I think that's the same thing. There's always going to be, in the Venn diagram, there's always going to be elements of friction, and it's how do you collaborate and compromise, scary word, but one that needs to be in a constant dialogue. So I guess it's not that one size fits all, one trick pony, once and done. It's like, how do you continue to build that ongoing relationship, ongoing dialogue, and therefore ongoing language that everyone's able to speak? It's a bit of a woolly answer to your question, but it's a longer term thing.
Yeah, just really quickly, it goes back to my point around that co-design, co-creation. So absolutely, those people with that lived experience, make sure that we bring them on board when we're making those hard decisions, and listen to them and understand so that we use the right language, play back to them what they're telling us rather than us kind of doing something to them. So yeah, it goes back to that co-design piece for me.
So I might be a little bit disruptive here. So this comes back to why on earth are we asking the private sector to go and engage with communities on stuff? So Mick Baines built my building. Yeah, I'll let you know the architect who it was. He was brilliant. If we have a public sector procurement and we now have legislation that looks at early market engagement, and we have more data in public sector that we can shake sticks at. We know about communities. We know because we do strategic intelligence assessments every year. We do loads of community consultation. Why are we not just inviting the community into that early market engagement and having a proper conversation? Because that'll make things a lot easier. As opposed to communities that are fatigued. Because, I think about Teesside, and it's a massive investment area at the moment, which is phenomenal. It's brilliant. And that's come from, politics working in the right way and all of the investment that's coming in, and definitely into the northeast. But we were working in Hartlepool, and, there must have been 7 different organisations going into, the kind of the worst demographic ward that's in there. And they're just like, Jesus, why can't you just, join up? So again, I go back to the system. If we recreate the system, which means that it just makes really, really everything a lot easier, then it would be a lot easier for McBain's then to say, oh, well, we can do the architecture bits on that. We can do, if it's a food related, then this is this is what we can do from a food perspective. And all of a sudden your supply chain and everybody that's involved in that massive public sector procurement that you can still score on in the procurement process can then actually do something that's proportionate and relevant for them.
Amazing, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. We haven't had any online.
Hi everyone, my name's Sophie and I work for Overbury Fit Out Refurbishment Contractor. My question is just maybe a bit of advice really. Something that I struggle with, we talk a lot about storytelling and case studies and things like that, is how to do that without gaining the trust of the community through storytelling without looking boastful or a bit exploitative, and using those vulnerable people's stories for our gain, if that makes sense. I just want a little bit of advice on how best to storytell.
Really, really, really carefully, with a hell of a lot of training, trauma-informed training, deep listening training. Don't send anyone out to do it. It's not the sort of thing. It's not just like, let's just get a few case studies. It's a really, really delicate, sensitive piece of work. And often, you also need to tell people how their stories are going to be used, de-identify the stories. You need to, there's a huge GDPR to be involved. There's consent. There's so many things. So that I've got a big red exclamation mark in front of my face at the moment as a warning. Yeah. But when you do it and you do it right, and you hear the stories and you can pull them together with other stories and pull out themes and make something meaningful and use those stories to make change and get people with power to listen and act on it, then those stories are absolutely priceless. So advocate for gathering the stories, but really, really carefully.
Sorry, I'm going to be disruptive again. Don't. There's a really powerful thing in people talking about their own story. So when I think there was an organisation in Middlesbrough that we worked with on the building called Links, and we were doing some work with them, and actually all we did was help them to tell their story on their social value platforms, not social value, social media platforms, and we supported them. So it goes back to the shared value thing again. So they need to amplify their voice and their impact in the community. So rather than Cleveland Police coming up with a marketing campaign around all the social value associated with the building, how do we just then help them through our marketing department amplify their voice? And then we would then use their material and reshare. So actually, some of the issues that Marnie's talking about there, it's about their perspective in the world. And don't get me wrong, it's not linear. Progress is not always good. And when they're saying things are crap, it's really important to say as a company, yeah, they are actually, let's do something different. That's the authentic bit, and that's where trust comes in, because everybody makes hay while the sun shines, but it's when things go wrong that that's where people need to be rallying around and saying, actually, let's do something different.
Amazing. That round of applause tells me I'm running out of time. I don't know about anyone else. I mean, I guess just thank you. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for listening, asking good questions from the audience. But thank you to the panel. I think we answered the brief. But more importantly, I think personally, having sat, we reflected at the start that sometimes in this field of work, and when you spend a day full of wonderful people like this, you're operating in an echo chamber sometimes, and that's not always a bad thing, because you come away from a day like today feeling inspired, feeling like we are going to change the world. It might take us a long time, it might take us generations, but we're full of a room full of people, and I'm sat with a panel full of people that are chipping slowly but surely away at doing that. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing. Thanks, everyone.